The officer thought he was stopping a stranger on a quiet road. He never imagined he was questioning a man whose decisions had shaped the very laws he was sworn to protect. On a peaceful evening outside Atlanta, Georgia, Officer Ethan Caldwell began what he believed would be an ordinary traffic stop. At only 25 years old, Ethan was still learning what it meant to wear the uniform. He was a rookie officer with something to prove. Every shift felt like a test. Every decision felt like a chance to show his supervisors that he belonged. Ethan believed being a good officer meant being alert, careful, and prepared for anything. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the Georgia skyline, he noticed a vehicle traveling along a quiet highway. Nothing about the car seemed unusual. It was a regular sedan. The driver appeared calm. There was no visible sign that the person behind the wheel was connected to anything beyond an ordinary life. Ethan initiated the traffic stop, expecting a simple conversation that would end within minutes. Behind the wheel was Marcus Ellington, a man who looked like any other driver heading home after a long day. He wore casual clothes, drove a modest vehicle, and gave no indication of his professional position. To someone passing by, he was simply another person on the road. But appearances rarely tell the entire story. Marcus Ellington was a federal judge who had spent decades studying the law, protecting the principles of justice, and making decisions that affected countless lives. Yet, on that evening, he was not thinking about his title. He was not thinking about his courtroom. He was simply a citizen waiting to understand why he had been stopped. Marcus lowered his window and greeted the officer politely. "Good evening, officer." His voice was calm. His behavior was respectful. He answered the questions that were asked and followed the process without creating conflict. Ethan noticed that Marcus seemed unusually composed. Many people became nervous during traffic stops, but Marcus remained patient. What Ethan did not know was that patience came from years of experience. Marcus had spent his career seeing people during their most difficult moments. He understood that fairness required listening before making judgments. He understood that every person had a story that could not be discovered by a first impression. Ethan reviewed the information provided and continued with routine questions. In his mind, he was doing exactly what he had been trained to do. He was observing details. He was following procedure. He was trying to make the right decisions. But there was one important detail he did not know. The person sitting in front of him was not just someone who understood the law. He was someone who had dedicated his entire life to interpreting it. Marcus had stood inside courtrooms where decisions carried enormous responsibility. He had studied the balance between authority and fairness. He knew that the law was strongest when it protected the dignity of every person. The highway remained quiet. The traffic continued moving in the distance. Neither man knew that this simple interaction would soon become a powerful lesson about perception, responsibility, and justice. Ethan saw a driver. Marcus knew he was a person with a lifetime of experience. And the truth behind that difference was about to change everything. The most important details in any situation are often the ones people fail to notice at first. On the quiet highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, Officer Ethan Caldwell continued the traffic stop believing he was handling a routine encounter. He looked at the vehicle, reviewed the information, and focused on the facts available to him in that moment. What he did not yet understand was that the person sitting across from him carried a lifetime of experience with the very system Ethan was trying to represent. Marcus Ellington remained calm as the conversation continued. He answered each question carefully and respectfully. He did not mention his position as a federal judge. He did not use his title to change the way he was treated. To Marcus, respect should not depend on someone discovering a person's importance. It should exist from the beginning. That belief came from decades of working within the legal system. Marcus had spent years inside courtrooms where every decision required patience, careful thought, and an understanding that every individual had a story beyond what could be seen in a single moment. He had learned that justice was not only about knowing the law. It was about understanding people. Ethan, however, viewed the situation through a different lens. As a rookie officer, he wanted to prove that he was capable and responsible. He believed attention to detail was one of the most important qualities of a good officer. He had been taught to observe, to ask questions, and to remain aware of his surroundings. Those lessons were valuable. But experience had not yet taught him one of the most difficult lessons in public service. Sometimes the biggest challenge was not recognizing a problem. Sometimes it was recognizing when assumptions could affect the way a person was seen. Marcus noticed the difference between following a procedure and understanding the person involved. He had witnessed many interactions between authority and citizens throughout his career. He knew that the first few moments of an encounter could shape everything that followed. A person who felt respected was more likely to trust the process. A person who felt judged might remember the experience long after it ended. The dashcam inside Ethan's patrol vehicle quietly recorded every word and every moment of the interaction. Neither man paid much attention to it. To Ethan, it was simply part of standard police procedure. To Marcus, it was simply another part of an ordinary evening. But that recording would later become an important piece of the story. For now, the two men stood beside the road, connected by a moment neither of them fully understood. Ethan saw a driver who seemed unusually calm. Marcus saw a young officer still learning the weight of his responsibilities. Neither man knew that their brief conversation would eventually raise larger questions about fairness, judgment, and accountability. The difference between them was not the law itself. Both men respected the law. The difference was experience. Marcus had spent decades learning that authority was strongest when combined with humility. Ethan was still learning that lesson. And as the evening continued, the gap between what was visible and what was true became impossible to ignore. The truth about a person is rarely found in the first few minutes of an encounter. Sometimes it takes time, patience, and a willingness to look beyond what is immediately visible. On the quiet highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, Officer Ethan Caldwell continued speaking with Marcus Ellington, still unaware that the man standing before him had spent decades studying the very laws that guided his own actions. The traffic stop remained calm, but the difference between perception and reality continued to grow. Marcus answered every question with the same steady tone he had used from the beginning. He understood that Ethan was doing his job. He understood that officers were trained to gather information and make decisions carefully. But Marcus also understood that every decision made by someone in authority carried a deeper responsibility. During his years as a federal judge, Marcus had witnessed thousands of moments where people were judged before their full stories were known. He had seen how a single assumption could influence an entire situation. That experience shaped the way he approached every interaction. He believed that fairness was not something people deserved only after proving themselves. Fairness was something everyone deserved from the beginning. Ethan continued reviewing the details of the traffic stop. He was focused on doing everything correctly. He wanted to show that he was capable of handling situations independently. Like many new officers, he believed confidence came from being prepared and following the rules. But there was another part of the job that could only be learned through time. It was the ability to understand the person behind the circumstances. Marcus had learned that lesson long before he ever became a judge. Growing up, he saw how important the legal system was in shaping people's lives. He dedicated himself to studying the law because he believed justice was not only about decisions made in courtrooms. It was about making sure every person had the opportunity to be heard. Over the years, Marcus built a reputation for being thoughtful, fair, and patient. Colleagues respected him because he never forgot the human side of the law. He understood that behind every case was a person with a history, a family, and a future. That evening, however, Ethan did not see the years of service behind Marcus's calm expression. He saw only the information available in front of him. He saw a driver during a traffic stop. He did not see a judge who had dedicated his life to understanding justice. The difference was not caused by a lack of intelligence. It came from a lack of information, and that was what made the moment so important. People often make decisions based on what they know at a specific time, but wisdom comes from recognizing that there is always more to learn. The dashcam continued recording silently from the patrol vehicle. Every word, every pause, and every detail of the interaction was preserved. Neither Ethan nor Marcus knew how important that recording would become. For now, they were simply two people standing beside a road, connected by an unexpected moment. One was a young officer still learning what authority truly meant. The other was a judge who had spent a lifetime teaching himself and others the meaning of fairness. And soon, the truth hidden beneath the surface would change the way everyone viewed this encounter. The moments that change people are not always dramatic when they begin. Sometimes they start quietly, during ordinary conversations where nobody realizes the importance of what is happening. On the highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, Officer Ethan Caldwell continued the traffic stop with the same focus he had from the beginning. He believed he was simply following procedure, asking questions, and making sure everything was handled correctly. But while Ethan was focused on the details in front of him, he did not realize that the situation was revealing something much deeper about judgment, responsibility, and perspective. Marcus Ellington remained patient throughout the conversation. He noticed the way Ethan approached the situation, and he understood something that came from years of experience. People often reveal their understanding of responsibility through small actions. The way they speak, the way they listen, the way they treat someone when they do not know that person's background. Marcus had spent decades inside courtrooms where those small moments mattered. As a federal judge, he knew that every decision had consequences. He knew that a person's future could be affected by how carefully someone listened and how fairly someone considered the facts. That responsibility shaped his entire approach to life. He never believed that authority existed to separate people. He believed authority existed to serve people. Ethan continued reviewing the situation, unaware of the larger meaning behind the encounter. He was still early in his career, and every interaction felt like an opportunity to prove himself. He wanted to be seen as someone who could handle responsibility. He wanted his supervisors to know they had made the right choice by trusting him with the badge. But experience was teaching him a lesson that no training manual could fully explain. Being responsible was not only about knowing the rules. It was about understanding the people affected by those rules. The dashcam inside Ethan's vehicle continued recording the entire interaction. The small camera captured every moment without emotion or opinion. It did not make assumptions. It did not judge. It simply preserved the truth of what happened. At the time, neither Ethan nor Marcus thought much about the recording. For them, it was just another part of a normal traffic stop. But that camera would later become the one thing that allowed others to see the situation clearly. As the conversation continued, Marcus decided not to reveal his position. He could have mentioned that he was a federal judge. He could have changed the entire dynamic instantly, but he chose not to. He believed that respect should not come from a title being discovered. It should come from how people treat each other before they know anything else. That choice showed the difference between power and character. Power could change how people reacted. Character showed who someone truly was. Ethan looked at Marcus and saw a calm driver. Marcus looked at Ethan and saw a young officer still learning. Neither man understood yet that this encounter would soon become a lesson discussed far beyond that highway. The road remained quiet, but the meaning of the moment was becoming clearer. One person was learning that appearances never tell the complete story. The other was proving that true dignity does not need to announce itself. And somewhere inside the patrol vehicle, the dashcam continued recording the truth that would eventually change everything. The truth behind any situation often depends on the details people choose to notice. For several minutes on the highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, Officer Ethan Caldwell believed he understood the encounter happening in front of him. He believed he was speaking with a driver during a routine traffic stop. But the reality was far more complex than what appeared on the surface. Marcus Ellington remained calm as the conversation continued. He listened carefully, answered respectfully, and allowed the process to move forward without creating conflict. His patience was not accidental. It was the result of decades spent understanding how important fairness was when people held positions of responsibility. Marcus had spent his career inside courtrooms where emotions could be strong and decisions could have lasting effects. He knew that every person deserved to be heard before being judged. He also knew that people often revealed their true character during moments when they believed nobody important was watching. Ethan continued reviewing the information available to him. He was focused on completing his duty, but he was also unaware of how much he did not know. The person standing in front of him was not simply a driver. He was someone who had dedicated his life to studying the law and protecting the principles behind it. Yet Marcus chose not to reveal that immediately. He wanted the interaction to continue naturally. He believed that the way someone treated another person before learning their title revealed more than the way they acted after discovering it. That belief came from years of experience. Marcus had seen people change their behavior when they learned someone had influence or authority. But true fairness did not depend on discovering someone's importance. It depended on recognizing their humanity from the beginning. Inside the patrol vehicle, the dashcam continued recording. The small device captured the conversation exactly as it happened. It recorded the questions, the answers, and the quiet moments between them. At that time, it was simply another piece of police equipment. Neither Ethan nor Marcus understood that the footage would later become an important part of the story. As the minutes passed, the difference between the two men became clearer. Ethan was trying to understand the situation from the information he had. Marcus was watching the situation with the perspective of someone who had spent a lifetime studying human behavior and the law. One was learning through experience. The other was carrying experience that had already been earned. The evening remained peaceful around them. Cars continued traveling along the highway. The city lights reflected in the distance. Nothing about the scene suggested that this moment would become significant. But history is often shaped by ordinary moments that reveal something important. A conversation that seems small can expose the way people think. A simple decision can reveal the values behind it. Ethan believed he was evaluating a situation. Marcus understood that the situation was also revealing something about the person evaluating it. The truth was still hidden, but the dashcam had already captured everything. And soon, when others looked back at that recording, they would see a moment where assumptions met reality, and where the difference between authority and justice became impossible to ignore. The most important moments in life are often the ones that reveal what people truly value. On the highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, the traffic stop between Officer Ethan Caldwell and Marcus Ellington was still unfolding quietly. But the meaning behind it was becoming much larger than either man realized. Ethan continued following the steps he had been trained to follow. He asked questions, reviewed information, and focused on completing his responsibility. From his perspective, he was simply doing his job. But Marcus understood that every interaction with authority carried another responsibility that could not be written in a manual. It required awareness, patience, and the ability to see the person behind the situation. Marcus continued answering respectfully, even though he understood that the conversation had become more than a simple exchange of information. He had experienced moments like this before, not only as a citizen, but as someone who had spent decades inside the legal system. As a federal judge, Marcus had witnessed countless situations where the first impression was incomplete. He had seen how quickly people could form opinions without knowing the entire story. That understanding shaped the way he approached every challenge. He believed that fairness was not something people should receive only after proving their worth. It was something every person deserved from the beginning. Ethan, meanwhile, was beginning to notice something unusual. Marcus was not reacting the way he expected. There was no frustration, no attempt to argue, and no effort to use influence to change the conversation. Instead, Marcus remained patient and composed. For a young officer still learning the responsibilities of the job, that calmness was difficult to understand. Ethan had expected resistance. Instead, he found cooperation. He had expected someone trying to avoid questions. Instead, he found someone who seemed to understand the process better than most people he had encountered. The difference was that Marcus knew something Ethan did not. The strongest response to a difficult moment was not always proving that someone else was wrong. Sometimes it was showing enough patience for the truth to become clear on its own. Inside the patrol vehicle, the dashcam continued capturing the interaction. It recorded every word without judgment. It preserved the conversation exactly as it happened, creating an objective record of the moment. Neither Ethan nor Marcus thought about the future importance of that recording. They were simply standing beside a road, having a conversation that seemed ordinary. But ordinary moments can become meaningful when they reveal something deeper about people. As the evening continued, Marcus made a choice. He still did not reveal that he was a federal judge. He believed the lesson was more important than the title. If someone only showed respect after discovering a person's position, then that respect was incomplete. True character was revealed by how people treated others when they believed there was nothing special to notice. Ethan was still trying to understand the situation in front of him. Marcus was quietly observing the values behind the interaction. The two men were standing in the same place, but they were experiencing the moment from completely different perspectives. One was learning a lesson that experience would eventually teach him. The other had spent a lifetime understanding why that lesson mattered. And while the dashcam continued recording, the truth remained waiting for the moment when everyone would finally see the full story. The truth behind a situation often becomes clear only when people are willing to look beyond their first impressions. On the highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, the encounter between Officer Ethan Caldwell and Marcus Ellington continued quietly, but the meaning of that moment was becoming more significant with every passing minute. Ethan still believed he was handling a standard traffic stop. He was focused on procedure, information, and completing the task in front of him. But the longer the conversation continued, the more he noticed that Marcus was different from anyone he had expected to meet. Marcus remained calm, not because he was unaware of the situation, but because he understood it from a perspective Ethan had not yet experienced. He understood what it meant to stand on both sides of the legal system. He understood the importance of listening, patience, and fairness. Throughout his years as a federal judge, Marcus had learned that justice was not only found inside a courtroom. It was reflected in every interaction where one person had the ability to influence another person's experience. He believed that small moments revealed the true meaning behind authority. A person could have power, but the way they used that power showed their character. Ethan continued, reviewing the information available to him, but something about the situation stayed in his mind. Marcus did not seem like someone trying to avoid responsibility. He seemed like someone who respected the process. That was unusual to Ethan because many people reacted differently during traffic stops. Some became nervous. Some became frustrated. Marcus did neither. He simply waited and trusted that the truth would eventually become clear. The dashcam inside Ethan's patrol vehicle continued capturing the interaction. It recorded the conversation from beginning to end, preserving every detail without interpretation. At the time, nobody considered the future importance of the footage. It was simply another part of standard police equipment. But later, that recording would allow others to see what happened from a perspective beyond personal opinions. As the conversation continued, Ethan asked another question about Marcus's background. Marcus answered honestly but carefully. He still chose not to mention his position as a federal judge. He wanted the interaction to remain based on mutual respect, not influenced by recognition. Marcus knew that titles could change the way people behaved. He had seen it many times throughout his career. People sometimes treated someone differently after discovering their position, their achievements, or their influence. But true fairness existed before those details became known. That was the principle Marcus carried with him every day. Meanwhile, Ethan was beginning to experience something unfamiliar. He was realizing that the person in front of him was not simply answering questions. He was demonstrating a level of understanding that came from years of experience. Ethan had the authority of the badge he wore. Marcus had the wisdom that came from decades of studying justice. The difference was not about who had more power. It was about understanding what power was supposed to mean. The highway remained peaceful. The evening continued around them. Yet inside that quiet moment, something important was taking place. A young officer was learning that responsibility required more than following steps. It required awareness of the people affected by those steps. And a judge was quietly proving that the strongest form of authority was not demanding respect. It was showing it first. The most meaningful changes often begin after the moment itself has passed. A conversation ends, a situation appears finished, and yet the lessons created by that moment continue to grow. On the highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, Officer Ethan Caldwell and Marcus Ellington were still unaware of how far the impact of their encounter would reach. To Ethan, the traffic stop had been an opportunity to complete his duties and gain more experience as a young officer. To Marcus, it had been another reminder of why respect and fairness mattered in every interaction. After the conversation continued, Marcus prepared to leave. He did not want the moment to become about his position. He did not want attention because he was a federal judge. What mattered to him was the principle behind the encounter. Every person deserved to be treated with dignity before anyone knew their background, career, or accomplishments. That belief had guided Marcus throughout his entire life. As a judge, he had seen how decisions made in small moments could create lasting effects. He knew that people remembered not only the outcomes of situations, but also how they were treated while those situations were happening. Ethan watched Marcus carefully as the interaction came to an end. The young officer had expected many things from the evening, but he had not expected to learn such an important lesson from the person he was questioning. He began thinking about the difference between having authority and understanding responsibility. A badge gave him the ability to perform his duties, but it also required him to recognize the humanity of every person he encountered. The dashcam inside the patrol vehicle continued holding the complete record of what happened. It captured the words, the pauses, and the atmosphere of the interaction. It did not show emotions or assumptions. It simply preserved the truth. In the days that followed, the recording became a subject of attention because it showed something that was easy to miss in the moment. It showed two people, with very different experiences meeting on the same road. One was a rookie officer still learning the deeper meaning of his role. The other was a federal judge who had spent decades studying how justice affected real people. Chief Laura Whitaker later became aware of the situation and wanted to understand exactly what had occurred. She knew that leadership was not about ignoring uncomfortable moments. It was about examining them honestly and learning from them. She reviewed the details because every interaction between law enforcement and the public represented the values of the department. Marcus supported that approach. He believed improvement came from reflection, not denial. He did not want the focus to be on punishment or embarrassment. He wanted people to understand the larger lesson. The purpose of authority was not to create distance between people. It was to build trust. For Ethan, the experience became a turning point. He realized that being a good officer required more than knowing procedures. It required patience, awareness, and the ability to recognize that every person had a story beyond what was visible. The highway where the encounter happened looked the same afterward. Cars continued passing. The lights continued shining across the road. But for those involved, the meaning of that evening had changed forever. It was no longer just a traffic stop. It was a reminder that justice begins long before a courtroom. It begins with how people choose to treat each other when nobody knows the full story yet. Some moments are remembered not because they were loud, but because they quietly changed the way people see the world. The encounter on the highway outside Atlanta, Georgia, began as an ordinary traffic stop, but it became a powerful reminder that every person carries a story that cannot be discovered from a first impression alone. In the days after the interaction, Officer Ethan Caldwell continued thinking about what had happened. He understood that being an officer was not only about following procedures. It was about understanding the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. The experience gave him a new perspective on the difference between having authority and earning trust. A badge could provide the ability to enforce the law, but character determined how that responsibility was carried. Ethan was still early in his career, but the lesson would stay with him for years. He learned that every person he met deserved to be approached with fairness, regardless of what could or could not be seen at first glance. Marcus Ellington returned to his work as a federal judge, continuing the same mission that had guided him throughout his career. He never wanted the focus to be on his title or position. He wanted people to understand something much simpler. Justice was not only found in court decisions. It was found in everyday choices. It was found in the patience someone showed during a difficult conversation. It was found in the willingness to listen before making conclusions. It was found in the respect people gave to others when they had no reason to expect anything in return. The dashcam footage from Ethan's vehicle became an important reminder of how valuable truth could be. The recording did not favor one person over another. It did not make assumptions. It simply showed the events as they unfolded. That was the power of evidence. It allowed people to move beyond opinions and focus on facts. Chief Laura Whitaker understood that moments like this were opportunities for reflection. A strong organization was not one that ignored challenges. It was one that learned from them. She believed that trust between law enforcement and communities was built through honesty, accountability, and a commitment to improvement. The story of Ethan and Marcus was not about one person winning and another person losing. It was about recognizing a deeper lesson. People are often more complicated than the first image they present. A person who appears ordinary may carry extraordinary experiences. A person who holds authority may still need reminders about humility and understanding. Years later, Ethan would remember that evening not because of the road where it happened, but because of what it taught him. He learned that justice was not only a responsibility for judges inside courtrooms. It was also a responsibility for every person who represented the law. Marcus's lesson was equally powerful. He showed that true dignity did not need to announce itself. It did not depend on recognition, status, or position. It existed in the way someone carried themselves when facing uncertainty. In the end, the highway remained the same. The traffic continued. The city lights continued shining. But the meaning of that evening lasted far beyond that moment. Because sometimes the greatest lessons in justice come from the quietest encounters. He thought he was meeting a stranger. He discovered he was meeting a reminder that fairness begins with seeing the person before seeing the title.